Have you ever known the exact, soul-crushing weight of being completely, hopelessly broke? It's not just a number in a bank account. It's a physical sensation. It's the tightness in your chest when you realize you have to choose between buying groceries or keeping the heat on in the middle of January. It's the hot flush of shame that crawls up your neck when you're standing in a public place, pleading for a shred of mercy from someone who holds your financial life in their hands. That was exactly where I was on a bleak Tuesday morning. I was standing in the fluorescent-lit, suffocatingly sterile lobby of the Regional Tax Compliance Office. The room smelled of cheap institutional coffee, vet wool, and collective anxiety. My hands, shoved deep into the pockets of a faded blank, oversized thrift store sweater that was unraveling at the cuffs, were shaking. Clutched in my right hand was a final notice printed on threatening red paper. A $400 penalty, a late fee on an old, misfiled tax form from 3 years ago that had snowballed into a monstrous sum I simply could not pay. To someone wealthy, $400 is a casual dinner. To me, it was a death sentence. It was 2 months of groceries. It was the difference between keeping my tiny, freezing apartment and being evicted. Sitting across from me, separated by a thick pane of smudge-proof plexiglass and an ocean of unchecked privilege, was Mr. Vance. Mr. Vance was the kind of mid-level bureaucrat who treated his desk like a throne. He wore a poorly tailored suit that he clearly thought made him look like a Wall Street shark, complete with a flashy, oversized watch that screamed bought on credit. His hair was slicked back with too much gel, and his lips were perpetually curled into a condescending sneer. He didn't just process tax claims, he weaponized them. "Look, miss." Vance sighed loudly, his voice booming through the small speaker system on the glass. He made sure he was speaking loud enough for the 24 miserable people sitting in the plastic waiting chairs behind me to hear every single word. "I don't know what kind of charity you think we run here, but this is the federal government. We don't do sob stories. Please, Mr. Vance," I whispered, fighting back the hot tears stinging the corners of my eyes. I hated myself for crying, but the exhaustion was breaking me. "I'm not asking for charity. I just need a payment plan. If you demand the $400 today, I won't make rent. I have $12 to my name right now. Just give me 30 days. Please." He let out a sharp, mocking laugh that cut through the quiet murmur of the lobby. Several heads turned to stare at me. I wanted the cheap linoleum floor to swallow me whole. $12, Vance repeated, his tone dripping with absolute disgust. He leaned back in his plush leather chair, twirling an expensive metal pen between his fingers. A $400 late fee is standard for tax-evading lowlifes. You think you can just ignore the law and then come in here crying when the bill comes due? It's pathetic. People like you are a drain on the system. I bit my lips so hard I tasted copper. I didn't evade anything. It was a mistake. Save it, he snapped, leaning forward abruptly. His eyes narrowed into cruel slits. "I'm done wasting taxpayer time on you. I'm initiating an immediate bank lien. We're going to freeze whatever pathetic checking account you have. And we'll garnish your wages until this is paid with maximum interest. Give me your social security number." Now my heart plummeted into my stomach. A bank lien, a freeze. They would take my $12. And then they would take the paycheck I was desperately waiting for on Friday. I would be homeless. "Please don't do this." "Ibegel?" My voice cracking. "I'll do anything. Please. Social. Security. Number." He tapped his metal pen aggressively against the glass. "Tap tap. Tap unless you want me to call security and have you dragged out of here for obstructing federal procedures." Defeated, humiliated, and utterly broken, I recited the 9 digits. My voice was barely a whisper. Vance smirked, a predatory smile of pure, unchecked power. "Thank you. Let's see just how much of a mess your life is." He turned his attention to his dual monitor setup. His fingers flew across the keyboard with arrogant aggression. Clack, 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 clack. He hit the enter key with a theatrical flourish, ready to bring the hammer down on my entire existence. I squeezed my eyes shut, bracing for the final blow. I waited for him to announce that my account was frozen. I waited for the final, humiliating dismissal. But the dismissal never came. Instead, The aggressive clacking of his keyboard abruptly stopped. The silence that followed was heavy, sudden, and deeply unnatural. I slowly opened my eyes. The reflection of Vance's primary monitor was painting his face in a harsh, bright light, but the smug, arrogant sneer that had been plastered on his face just seconds ago was completely gone. It hadn't just faded, it had been violently wiped away. His jaw hung slack. His eyes, suddenly wide and bulging, were locked on the screen with a look of absolute, unadulterated terror. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a wax figure. His skin turned a sickly percentan, translucent shade of gray. A thick bead of cold sweat instantly formed at his hairline and rolled down his temple. "Mr. Vance?" I asked, my voice trembling. Is something wrong?" He didn't blink. He didn't breathe. His hands began to shake, not a slight tremor, but a violent, uncontrollable rattling. The expensive metal pen he had been twirling slipped from his suddenly numb fingers. It hit his desk with a loud clatter that echoed through the silent lobby, before rolling off the edge and hitting the floor. He didn't even flinch. This Vance croaked. His voice was completely different. The booming authority was gone, replaced by a pathetic, high-pitched wheeze. He sounded like a man who had just looked over the edge of an abyss. This has to be a catastrophic system error. I need to refresh." He frantically slammed the F5 key with a trembling index finger. The screen blinked. He stared at it again. If anything, he looked even more horrified. He gripped the edges of his desk so hard his knuckles turned white, as if the ground beneath him was giving way. Slowly, agonizingly, he raised his head to look at me through the plexiglass. The condescension in his eyes had been replaced by pure, paralyzing fear. He looked at me not like a tax-evading lowlife, but like I was a deity who had just descended from the heavens to smite him. "Mum," he stammered, his teeth practically chattering. He swallowed hard, visibly struggling to force the words past the massive lump in his throat. The Treasury Department system, it's showing a verified, incoming federal clearing wire, linked directly to your social security number. I froze. A wire? For what? Am I going to jail? Vance shook his head frantically, sweat now dripping off his chin. "No, ma'am. Not jail. You just received $93. Suling REE. 85. The entire lobby behind me seemed to stop breathing. Before I explain how a girl who was literally planning to sell her blood plasma later that afternoon just to afford a $400 late fee suddenly had a net worth larger than a medium-sized tech startup, hit that subscribe button, and let me take you back to how this nightmare began. To truly understand the absolute absurdity of a federal auditor telling me I had $93 million sitting in a government clearing account, you have to understand where I was, exactly 72 hours earlier. 72 hours before I broke the federal tax system, my entire net worth consisted of a miserable $12. 14 inches my checking account, an overdrawn savings account, and a rusty mason jar filled with dull pennies and nickels sitting on my kitchen counter. I lived in a dilapidated Bacala, 400-square-foot studio apartment in the kind of neighborhood where police sirens were just background noise to help you sleep. It was the dead of January, and my landlord, a slumlord, who hadn't answered a text since 2024, refused to fix the central heating. The temperature inside my apartment hovered around a bone-chilling 42 degrees. I was surviving by wearing 3 pairs of socks, my winter coat indoors, and boiling water in a dented kettle just to hold my hands over the steam. My dinner that Friday night was a 15-cent packet of generic Fromsent, off-brand beef ramen, the kind that tastes entirely like salt and regret. As I sat on my mattress on the floor because a bed frame was a luxury I couldn't afford, I mentally calculated my survival strategy. If I walked the 4 miles to my part-time data entry job instead of taking the bus, I could save exactly $2.50 a day. That meant by Thursday, I could afford a loaf of bread and maybe a jar of peanut butter. The math of poverty is exhausting. It takes up every ounce of your brain power, leaving no room for dreams, ambition, or even basic happiness. Then I went downstairs to check my mailbox. The lock was broken, hanging loosely from the rusted metal. Inside was a single, thick envelope bearing the terrifying seal of the Regional Tax Authority. I ripped it open with numb fingers. Standing in the dimly lit hallway, the paper inside was bright, alarming red. Final notice of delinquency. Balance due immediately. Subai Mayren Ling Ling. My heart stopped. The paper detailed a minor error on a tax return from 3 years ago, a misfiled 1099 form from a freelance gig that had originally owed me a refund, but because of bureaucratic red tape and compounding penalties, it had mutated into this impossible figure. Failure to remit $400. 00 by Tuesday at 9:00 a.m. will result in immediate wage garnishment and asset freezing. The letter threatened in bold, unfeeling print. I slid down the hallway wall, clutching the paper to my chest, and began to hyperventilate. The cold air burned my lungs. $400. They might as well have asked me for 400,000. It was an insurmountable mountain. If they garnished my pathetic wages, I would miss rent. If I missed rent, the eviction notice already taped to my neighbor's door would be on mine next. I was staring down the barrel of homelessness over a bureaucratic typo. Desperation makes you do humiliating things. It forces you to swallow your pride and choke on the shards. I pulled out my cracked phone and scrolled to a number I had sworn I would never call again. Derek. Derek was my ex-boyfriend. He worked as a junior analyst at a mid-tier finance firm. He wore cheap suits that he tailored to look expensive. He spent his weekends at country clubs he couldn't afford to join, and possessed an ego the size of a blimp. He had dumped me 6 months prior because, in his exact words, my poverty mindset was dragging down his personal brand. He had immediately started dating Chloe, a girl whose father owned a chain of car dealerships. My thumb hovered over his name. I felt violently ill, but the red warning letter glared up at me. I hit call. He answered on the 4th ring. Loud, obnoxious club music thumped in the background, mixed with the clinking of expensive glassware. Wow, Derek's voice slurred slightly, dripping with immediate condescension. To what do I owe this? Desperate blast from the past. Did you butt dial me from the soup kitchen? I closed my eyes, squeezing back tears. Derek, please. I'm sorry to bother you. I'm in a really bad situation. The tax office claims I owe them a late fee, and if I don't pay it by Tuesday, they're going to freeze my bank account. I'm going to get evicted. And he asked, completely devoid of empathy. Sounds like a you problem. I just need a loan, I pleaded, hating how small my voice sounded. Just a micro loan. I need $400. I swear to God, Derek, I will pay you back $10 a week. I'll clean your apartment. I'll do anything. Please. The music in the background seemed to dip just so I could hear his cruel, booming laugh perfectly. Wait. You're calling me on a Friday night to beg for $400? Derek scoffed loudly, clearly wanting whoever was next to him to hear. Are you serious, Chloe? And I literally spent $450 on oysters and bottomless mimosas at brunch today. You are a grown woman crying over pocket change. Derek, please. I have no one else. Look, this is exactly why I left you, he interrupted, his tone turning vicious. You are a black hole of financial ruin. You're a loser. Don't call this number ever again. Figure your own miserable life out. Click. The line went dead. I sat on the freezing hallway floor, crying until I physically couldn't shed another tear. He was right. I was a loser. I had nothing. The weekend was a blur of agonizing anxiety. I tried to sell my clothes online, but no one wanted faded sweaters. I researched selling my blood plasma, but the clinic was closed until Monday afternoon, too late for my Tuesday morning deadline. When Tuesday morning finally arrived, the sky was a depressing, heavy gray. I scraped together exactly $1. 75 inches quarters and dimes from my mason jar for the bus fare. The bus ride to the federal building felt like a funeral march. I sat on a damp, cracked vinyl seat, shivering in my oversized coat. I stared out the fogged-up window at the city waking up. I saw people in warm, Brightly lit coffee shops laughing over $7 lattes. I saw businessmen in tailored coats stepping out of warm Ubers. They lived in a completely different universe. A universe where a piece of red paper didn't mean the end of your life. I felt entirely invisible, like a ghost haunting a city that didn't care if I existed or vanished. When I finally walked through the heavy glass doors of the tax office, my spirit was already broken. I took my ticket from the automated machine. Number 84. I sat in those hard plastic chairs for 2 hours, watching the digital numbers slowly tick up, feeling like a lamb waiting for the slaughterhouse. And then, they called my number to window 4, Mr. Vance's window. I walked up to that plexiglass feeling less than human. I was prepared to beg, to cry, to grovel for my financial life over $400. I was completely at the mercy of people who looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. Which brings us right back to the moment Vance's fingers froze on his keyboard. The moment his smug face turned ghost white. And the moment he choked out a number so large, it didn't even sound like real money. You just received $93. 45021 85. The words hung in the stale air of the lobby, completely absurd and entirely incomprehensible. For a solid 10 seconds, time simply stopped. The coughing man in the back row stopped coughing. The mother trying to quiet her toddler froze. The only sound in the entire room was the low, electric hum of the fluorescent lights overhead and the rapid, shallow wheezing coming from Mr. Vance's side of the glass. I stared at him, my brain completely short-circuiting. When you are steeped in the kind of poverty where you calculate the cost of a single bus ride, your mind fundamentally rejects numbers that large. $1,000 is a miracle. 10,000 is a lottery win. 93 million is not money. It is an abstract concept. It is a typo. It is a terrifying glitch in a system that usually only exists to crush you. What did you just say? I whispered, my voice trembling so hard I almost choked on my own tongue. Vance didn't answer right away. He couldn't. His arrogant, gelled-back persona was shattering in real time. He looked like a man who had just realized he was standing on a landmine, and he had already heard the click. He frantically looked left and right, his eyes darting around the open cubicle farm behind him, terrified that someone else had seen his monitor. Suddenly, he slammed his hand down on a red button hidden beneath his desk. A loud, jarring buzz echoed from the heavy security door located to the right of the plexiglass windows. Vance shot up out of his chair so fast it rolled backward and slammed into a filing cabinet. He practically sprinted out of his booth and threw open the security door, stepping out into the public lobby. He wasn't sneering anymore. His face was a mask of absolute, unadulterated panic. The sweat that had beaded on his forehead was now actively rolling down his neck, soaking the cheap collar of his dress shirt. "Mom, please," he gasped, his voice tight and breathless. He held the heavy door open, gesturing frantically with a shaking hand. "Please, step inside. Right now, we cannot do this out here. I need you to come with me immediately." No, I took a step back, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Every survival instinct I had honed living at the bottom of the barrel was screaming at me to run. "No, I'm not going back there. You're trying to arrest me. I didn't do anything. I told you. I didn't evade taxes. I just..." "Mom, I swear to God on my children's lives. Nobody is arresting you," Vance pleaded. And for the first time, the groveling in his voice was raw and genuine. He looked around at the staring crowd in the lobby, his panic mounting. "You are not in trouble, but you hold a Tier 1 federal security clearance alert right now. And if my supervisor sees what is on my screen before I secure you, I will lose my job. Please, let me help you." The phrase, "let me help you," coming from the man who had just called me a tax-evading lowlife 2 minutes ago was so jarring that I mechanically stepped forward. I walked past the threshold, and the heavy security door clicked shut behind us, instantly muting the murmurs of the crowded lobby. The atmosphere shifted entirely. Vance didn't lead me to his standard cubicle. Instead, he walked me down a long, carpeted hallway, past rows of confused junior auditors. until we reached the very back of the building. He stopped in front of a heavy, solid oak door with a frosted glass plaque that read, Director of Compliance. Secure briefing room. He swiped a master keycard with a trembling hand, pushed the door open, and practically ushered me inside. The room was jarringly luxurious compared to the sterile lobby. It featured dark mahogany wood paneling, a massive polished marble conference table, and plush, oversized leather chairs that smelled like expensive cologne and old money. It was a room designed for people who owned politicians, not for girls wearing unraveled thrift store sweaters. Sit, please. Sit anywhere. Vance stammered, pulling out the largest chair at the head of the table for me like a terrified butler. I collapsed into the leather, my legs entirely giving out. My breathing was ragged. I watched as Vance scrambled over to a small mini-fridge in the corner. He practically ripped the door off its hinges, grabbed a bottle of imported sparkling water, and twisted the cap off so forcefully, he spilled half of it on his own sleeve. He placed it in front of me with both hands, as if presenting an offering to an angry deity. Then he pulled a sleek laptop from the center console, hooked it up to the massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall, and inserted his secure government thumb drive. I need to show you this, he said, his voice barely a whisper, because I know you think I'm crazy. I thought I was crazy. He typed in a series of passwords. The massive screen flickered to life. It wasn't a standard banking app. It was a stark, ultra-secure interface bearing the intimidating gold seal of the United States Department of the Treasury. The background was dark blue, and the text was bright, unforgiving white. At the top, my full legal name and social security number were displayed, and directly beneath that, pulsing with a green verified cleared tag, was the number 93,450. The digits stretched across the screen, massive and undeniable. There were so many commas. It looked completely alien. This is a direct, unencumbered, sovereign federal wire, Vance explained, pointing a shaking finger at the screen. He was standing 3 feet away from me, maintaining a respectful distance as if I might explode. It bypassed all standard retail banking protocols. It was routed directly from the Federal Reserve Clearinghouse straight to your SSN file. The system literally froze your $400 penalty because standard software cannot process an incoming wire this large while a micro penalty is active. It crashed my terminal. I stared at the screen. $93,450,211.85. Instead of jumping for joy, instead of screaming in celebration, a wave of profound, icy terror washed over me. I'm being framed. I choked out, grabbing the edges of the marble table to keep from passing out. The room started spinning. Oh my God. I'm a mule. Someone stole my identity. A cartel, or a Russian oligarch. They're using my SSN to launder dirty money. The FBI is going to kick that door down any second. I'm going to spend the rest of my life in federal prison. No, Vance practically shouted, dropping to one knee next to my chair in a desperate attempt to calm me down. The sight of this arrogant, power-tripping bureaucrat kneeling on the carpet in his cheap suit was surreal. Look at the origin code. Look, he pointed to a string of letters and numbers beneath the impossible fortune. This isn't international, Vance explained rapidly, his eyes wide, practically begging me to understand. The routing prefix is domestic. Specifically, it's from Washington, D.C. The sender is listed as the Escrow Trust of Sterling. Vance and Rothschild, one of the largest, most aggressive corporate litigation firms in the country. This isn't dirty money, miss. This is a legal payout. A massive one. I stared at him, my brain desperately trying to connect the dots. A corporate law firm. A legal payout. I hadn't sued anyone. I couldn't even afford to sue my slumlord for freezing me half to death. I don't even have a lawyer. I whispered, my voice cracking. I have $12 in my checking account. This is a mistake. It has to be. Vance slowly stood up, wiping the thick layer of sweat off his forehead with the back of his sleeve. He looked at me, taking in my frayed sweater. My worn-out shoes, and my terrified expression. The realization of what had just happened in the lobby was finally dawning on him. Miss Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, losing every ounce of its previous hostility. It was replaced by a deep, sickening realization of his own mortality. The federal treasury does not make $93 million typos. That money belongs to you. And I need to deeply, profoundly apologize for my behavior in the lobby. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. He looked like a man staring at a firing squad. I was stressed, he lied, his voice trembling again. I deal with a lot of difficult people, and I took it out on you. I was unprofessional, but you have to understand. I have a mortgage. I have 2 kids. If you report what I said to you out there to my superiors, with the kind of power you wield right now, they won't just fire me. They'll ruin my life. He was begging. The man who had laughed at my poverty, who had threatened to render me homeless over $400, was now begging for his professional life. But I barely heard him, because on the massive screen in front of me, a secondary notification had just popped up. Incoming secure call. Sterling, Vance and Rothschild. The words pulsed on the massive screen, casting a harsh, blue light across the dark mahogany of the VIP conference room. For a moment, neither Vance nor I moved. The silence was deafening, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart. "Answer it," I whispered, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. It was hollow, stripped of all emotion by sheer, overwhelming shock. Vance scrambled forward, his trembling fingers fumbling with the mouse. He clicked the green accept icon and tapped a button on the sophisticated console embedded in the center of the marble table to activate the room's high-fidelity speaker system. "This is Director Vance. Regional Tax Compliance," he announced, his voice cracking noticeably. He sounded like a private reporting to a 5-star general. There was a brief crackle of secure static, followed by a deeply resonant, authoritative voice that seemed to fill the entire room. It was the kind of voice that commanded boardrooms and terrified CEOs. "Director Vance, this is Arthur Sterling, Senior Managing Partner at Sterling, Vance and Rothschild in Washington, D.C. I am utilizing a priority federal override to connect with this terminal. I am looking for my client. According to the Treasury grid, she was just run through your compliance system. Is she present in the room with you?" Vance looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. "Yes, sir. She is sitting right across from me." "Excellent. Put me on speaker." You are on speaker, Mr. Sterling." A heavy sigh echoed through the speakers. "Good morning, Mum. First and foremost, I need to verify your identity. Could you please state your full legal name, your date of birth, and your mother's maiden name for the federal recording?" I gripped the armrests of the plush leather chair. My knuckles were bone white. I recited the information automatically, feeling like I was an actor reading a script in a dream. "Identity verified." Arthur Sterling's voice softened, losing a fraction of its intimidating corporate edge. "It is a profound honor to finally speak with you. I imagine you are currently experiencing a significant amount of shock. You likely have a screen in front of you displaying a figure you believe to be a typographical error." I thought I was being framed, I admitted, my voice trembling. "I have $12 in my bank account. I don't know who you are, and I don't know where this money came from. Please, tell me this isn't illegal." A varm, deeply sympathetic chuckle came through the speakers. "I can assure you, Mom, there is not a single cent of dirty money in that account. That capital is completely legal, entirely tax-free, and 100% yours. To understand why, we need to go back exactly 22 years. Tell me, do you remember a town called Oakhaven?" The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Oakhaven. My breath hitched. Suddenly, I wasn't sitting in a luxurious, climate-controlled tax office. I was 7 years old again, running barefoot through the dusty, overgrown yard of a rusted double-wide trailer. I remembered my mother, a fiercely hard-working woman who cleaned hotel rooms for minimum wage, scrubbing the metallic-smelling well water off her hands. I remembered the constant, hacking cough she developed when I was 10. I remembered holding her frail, skeleton-like hand in a hospice bed when I was 14, as the aggressive, unexplained cancer finally took her from me. Yes, I whispered, tears suddenly blurring my vision. I grew up there. My mother bought a small plot of land by the creek. She died when I was 14. I am so incredibly sorry for your loss, Mr. Sterling said, his tone turning grave and respectful. What your mother didn't know when she bought that land, and what none of the residents of Oakhaven knew, was that the creek ran directly off the clandestine dumping grounds of Apex Chemical, a multi-billion-dollar industrial conglomerate. For a decade, they illegally dumped highly toxic, carcinogenic runoff directly into the groundwater. Vance gasped softly, taking a step back from the table. Shortly before your mother passed, Sterling continued, she was approached by a junior attorney from our firm. She signed paperwork to opt into what would become the largest environmental class action lawsuit in United States history. Apex Chemical fought us tooth and nail. They delayed. They appealed. They tried to bleed us dry in court for over 2 decades, hoping the plaintiffs would die off or give up. But they underestimated us. I closed my eyes, a single tear escaping and rolling down my cheek. My mother, who had counted pennies just to buy me cheap school supplies, had fought a titan on her deathbed. Yesterday afternoon, at 4:00 p.m. Eastern Time, the Supreme Court of the United States denied Apex Chemical's final appeal, Sterling declared, a hint of fierce triumph bleeding into his professional composure. The settlement was finalized and immediately dispersed. Now, in a standard class action suit, the payout is divided equally among thousands of plaintiffs. Usually, that amounts to a few $1,000s each. He paused, letting the silence build in the room. However, during discovery, we uncovered internal company documents proving that Apex Chemical knew exactly where the highest concentration of toxins was pooling. It was pooling at the exact coordinates of your mother's property. Your childhood home was designated as Ground Zero because of the irrefutable evidence of willful negligence resulting in wrongful death. The federal judge awarded your estate the absolute lion's share of the punitive damages. I opened my eyes and stared at the screen. The numbers weren't just digits anymore. They were blood money. They were 20 years of my mother's suffering, finally acknowledged and avenged by the universe. So the number, I started, unable to finish the sentence. The number is $93. Suling are ye? Petinosem deset, Mr. Hara. Sterling finished for me, enunciating every single syllable with absolute clarity. It is sitting in a sovereign federal clearing account, shielded from any public records, and awaiting your command. You are officially a centimillionaire. My firm has already drafted the paperwork to transition into your dedicated, full-time wealth management and legal defense team, if you will have us. I didn't hyperventilate this time. The crushing, suffocating terror of poverty that had gripped my chest for my entire adult life suddenly snapped. It evaporated into thin air. In its place, a strange, cold, and incredibly powerful calm washed over me. I wasn't the broke girl begging for her life anymore. I was a queen inheriting her kingdom. I will have you, Mr. Sterling, I said, my voice entirely steady. The trembling in my hands had completely stopped. Excellent. We have a private jet fueled and waiting to bring you to Washington, D.C. whenever you are ready to sign the physical trust documents. Until then, your immediate liquidity is unlocked. I have authorized a digital black card linked to your phone. Use it as you see fit. Welcome to your new life. Mom. The call disconnected with a soft click. The room plunged back into silence. I slowly turned my head to look at Mr. Vance. He was standing perfectly still, his face dripping with sweat, looking at me as if I had just evolved into a higher species right in front of him. The man who had mocked my $12 bank account was now trapped in a locked room with someone who could legally buy the entire federal building he worked in, tear it down, and build a parking lot just for fun. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted. It had been annihilated. Well, Mr. Vance, I said softly, leaning back into the luxurious leather chair and crossing my arms. I looked at him not with anger, but with the cold, clinical curiosity of a scientist observing a pathetic insect. Let's talk about that $400 late fee. Vance physically recoiled as if I had struck him. He held up both hands in a desperate, placating gesture, his palms slick with sweat. Mom, please. Forget about the fee, he stammered, his voice jumping an octave. He took a hesitant step toward the table, bending his knees slightly, as if preparing to grovel. It's nothing. It was a clerical error, a misunderstanding. I can go into the system right now, use my director-level override, and wipe it completely clean. Consider it a courtesy. From me to you? He offered a sickeningly sweet, entirely fake smile. It was the smile of a cornered rat. I sat there and simply watched him. I watched the way his eyes darted around the room, assessing the sheer magnitude of the wealth I now commanded. I watched the way his body language had shrunk from a hulking, domineering bureaucrat to a cowering, subservient beggar. This was the ultimate test of human nature, and he was failing miserably. He wasn't apologizing because he felt bad for humiliating a poor girl in front of a crowded lobby. He wasn't offering to waive the fee because it was the right thing to do. He was doing it because he was terrified of my $93. Suling RE 85. He realized that I could hire an army of lawyers to drag him through the mud, or simply make a single phone call to the governor's office and have his pension stripped. He was a bully who had just realized he was picking on a titan. A courtesy, I repeated, my tone icy and devoid of any emotion. You told me the federal government doesn't run a charity, Mr. Vance. You told me I was a drain on the system. I was stressed, he pleaded, pulling at the collar of his cheap suit as if it were choking him. We see scammers all day, people trying to cheat the government. I misjudged you, and I am so profoundly sorry. Please, let me do this small favor for you. Let me fix my mistake. No, I said simply. I stood up from the mahogany table. My thrift store sweater suddenly felt like a suit of armor. I don't want your favors, and I certainly don't want your fake charity. We are going to do this entirely by the book. I walked past him, my cheap, scuffed shoes silent on the plush carpet. I reached for the heavy oak door. Wait, where are you going? Vance gasped, scrambling after me like a panicked dog. Back to your desk, I replied, pulling the door open and stepping out into the hallway. To pay my debt. The walk back to window 4 was entirely different this time. Before, I had felt like a prisoner walking to the gallows. Now I felt like an undercover boss surveying my own kingdom. I walked straight past the security door and back out into the dreary, crowded public lobby. The same people were still sitting in the plastic chairs, clutching their numbered tickets, looking exhausted and defeated. They had no idea that the girl in the unraveling sweater who had just been dragged away in tears was now the wealthiest person in the entire zip code. I walked right up to window 4 and stood there, waiting. 10 seconds later, Vance burst through the security door. He practically sprinted behind the glass, tripping over his own chair before slamming into his desk. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed, his eyes pleading with me through the smudge-proof plexiglass. Mom, I am begging you, he whispered into the intercom, making sure the lobby couldn't hear him. You don't need to do this. My supervisor is right down the hall. If he sees this. I ignored him. I reached deep into the inner pocket of my coat. I had lied to him earlier when I said I only had $12 to my name. I actually possessed exactly $400. It was my rent money, stashed in a battered, crinkled envelope, painstakingly saved over 2 months of skipping meals. It was my absolute last lifeline on earth, the only thing standing between me and sleeping on the frozen concrete. An hour ago, handing it over would have been a death sentence. Now it was just loose change. I opened the envelope and dumped the contents into the metal transaction tray beneath the glass. Clink, clink, rustle. It was a pathetic, chaotic pile of currency. There were crumpled $1 bills, a few ripped fives, 2 rolls of quarters, and a mountain of loose dimes and nickels. It was the undeniable physical manifestation of extreme poverty. Count it, I commanded, my voice sharp and authoritative. Vance stared at the pile of dirty money, as if it were radioactive waste. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with horror. "You have $93 million sitting in a federal vault right now. And you are paying me in quarters. I am paying my late fee. Standard procedure for a tax-evading lowlife." I shot back, quoting his exact insult. "Count every single cent." His hands were shaking so violently that he dropped a roll of quarters. It split open, scattering silver coins all over his desk. The junior auditors in the adjacent cubicles turned their heads, watching in utter confusion as their arrogant, domineering director frantically scrambled on his hands and knees to pick up dropped quarters for a girl in a faded sweater. It took him 5 agonizing minutes to count the crumpled bills and loose coins. His face burned with profound humiliation. He knew that I was making a mockery of him, forcing him to engage in this peasant transaction while knowing I held the GDP of a small island nation on my phone. It's exactly $400. 00, he whispered into the microphone, his spirit completely broken. He keyed the transaction into his terminal. "I need a stamped receipt," I demanded. "Signed by you, confirming my account is completely clear of any liens." Vance printed the receipt, grabbed his expensive metal pen, the same one he had twirled so arrogantly earlier, and signed it with a trembling hand. He slid it through the metal slot. "Thank you, Mum," he choked out, looking like he was on the verge of tears. "Your account is clear. Have a wonderful day." I took the paper, folded it neatly, and slid it into my pocket. I didn't say thank you. I didn't smile. I just turned my back on him and walked out of the federal building. The freezing January air hit my face as I stepped out onto the concrete steps. The heavy gray clouds had parted slightly, letting a single beam of sunlight strike the pavement. I pulled out my cracked, outdated phone. I had a new contact saved. Arthur Sterling. Priority Legal. I hit deal. He answered on the first ring. "Good afternoon. Mom, how can the firm assist you?" "Mr. Sterling," I said, looking up at the towering, 20-story luxury commercial high-rise that housed the regional tax agency. "I need you to contact the finest commercial real estate broker in the city. I want to make an acquisition." "Of course. What kind of property are we looking at?" I smiled. A cold, genuine smile. "I want to buy the building I'm standing in front of. Pay whatever they ask. In cash. I want the deed finalized by next week. Consider it done." "Mom." Exactly 7 days later, I returned to the regional tax compliance office, but this time, I didn't take the city bus. I didn't scrape together quarters for fare. And I wasn't wearing a thrift store sweater held together by loose threads and desperation. A sleek, midnight black Maybach 62 pulled smoothly up to the curb, right in the designated federal director's only parking zone. The driver, a former Secret Service agent hired by my new security detail, swiftly exited and opened my door. I stepped out onto the concrete. I was wearing a bespoke, midnight navy cashmere trench coat, tailored Italian trousers, and a pair of Christian Louboutin heels that clicked with absolute authority against the pavement. There were no flashy logos, no gaudy jewelry. It was the kind of understated, terrifying stealth wealth that screamed power without ever having to raise its voice. Flanking me were 3 men in impeccably tailored, sharkskin suits. To my right was Arthur Sterling, who had flown in from Washington, D.C. on my private jet just for this meeting. To my left was the senior partner of the city's most aggressive commercial real estate firm, and behind him was my newly appointed lead corporate auditor. We didn't wait in the freezing line outside. We didn't pull a numbered ticket from the automated machine in the lobby. We bypassed security entirely. The guards took one look at Arthur Sterling's platinum federal credential badge and immediately stepped aside, lowering their eyes. When we walked into the crowded, fluorescent-lit public lobby, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The clicking of my heels echoed like gunshots in the sudden, heavy silence. People stopped murmuring. Toddlers stopped crying. Every eye turned to watch the 4 of us part the sea of plastic waiting chairs like royalty inspecting a slum. I walked straight past the waiting area and stopped precisely in front of window 4. Mr. Vance was there, berating an elderly man over some minor deduction error. He looked up, his face flushed with his usual arrogant power trip, ready to yell at whoever was interrupting his tirade. His eyes locked onto mine. The transformation was instantaneous and beautiful. The blood completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a freshly embalmed corpse. His jaw unhinged. The expensive metal pen slipped from his fingers for the second time in a week, clattering uselessly onto his desk. He recognized me instantly, but he couldn't process the visual upgrade. The broken girl he had called a tax-evading lowlife was now standing before him, looking like a CEO about to initiate a hostile takeover. Mum, Vance croaked, his voice barely a whisper through the intercom. Before he could say another word, the heavy wooden door behind the cubicles swung open. Out walked a tall, heavy-set man wearing a Rolex that was entirely too big for his wrist, and a scowl that rivaled Vance's. This was Chief Director Reynolds, the head of the entire regional office. The man who had undoubtedly taught Vance everything he knew about bullying the poor. Vance, what is the holdup? Reynolds barked, marching over. He stopped and glared at us through the plexiglass. He took in my cashmere coat and my entourage of heavily suited men. He didn't know who I was. But his ego couldn't handle anyone looking more important than him in his own lobby. Excuse me, Reynolds snapped, puffing out his chest and tapping the glass. This is a federal workspace. You cannot just waltz in here with your lawyers and disrupt my lobby. If you don't have a scheduled appointment, I will have federal security escort you off the premises immediately. Vance looked like he was about to vomit. He grabbed Reynolds' arm, his fingers digging into his boss's sleeve. Sir, please, don't. Let go of me. Vance. Reynolds ripped his arm away, glaring at me. I don't care who you think you are, lady. You are standing in my building. I smiled. It was a slow, predatory smile that made Reynolds hesitate for a fraction of a second. I didn't say a word. I simply gestured lazily with 2 fingers toward Arthur Sterling. Sterling stepped forward, exuding the kind of terrifying, cold-blooded legal menace that commanded $2.500 an hour. He didn't slip a document through the little metal slot. He reached over and slammed a massive 3-inch thick, gold-embossed legal binder directly against the plexiglass, right in front of Reynolds' face. My client does not need a scheduled appointment to visit her own property. Director Reynolds. Sterling's voice boomed, resonating through the lobby speakers with devastating authority. Reynolds blinked, his arrogant scowl faltering. What the hell are you talking about? This is a federally leased commercial high-rise. We lease this building from Omnicorp Real Estate. Not anymore. My commercial broker chimed in smoothly, stepping up next to Sterling. As of 8:00 a.m. this morning, Omnicorp finalized a private sale. My client here just purchased this entire 20-story commercial high-rise. She paid $42. 0 inches straight. Unencumbered liquid cash. She holds the master deed. The entire lobby went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the cheap linoleum floor. Reynolds' face contorted into a mask of utter confusion and dawning horror. He looked from the massive legal binder to the broker, and finally to me. You bought the building, Reynolds stammered, his booming voice instantly shrinking into a pathetic squeak. I bought the building, I confirmed, my voice smooth as glass, dripping with absolute control, which means, Director Reynolds, that this is not your building. You are merely a tenant, and as of this morning, I am your supreme, undisputed landlord. Vance let out a sound that was half whimper, half sob. He stumbled backward, his legs hitting his desk chair, and collapsed into it. He knew exactly why I had done this. Now I continued, unbuttoning my cashmere coat with agonizing slowness. Let's talk about your lease. My legal team spent the weekend reviewing the federal contracts. It appears your agency's 10-year lease actually expired last month, and you have been operating on a rolling, month-to-month grace period while negotiating a renewal with Omnicorp. Reynolds began to sweat profusely. He swallowed hard. Yes. Mom. We have a pending renewal drafted. Draft rejected. I stated coldly. As the new property owner, I am exercising my legal right to restructure all month-to-month commercial agreements. As of 30 seconds ago, I have officially tripled your agency's monthly rent. Tripled. Reynolds shrieked, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. The professional facade was completely gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated panic. You can't do that. We are a government agency. We operate on a strict, pre-approved federal budget. If you triple our rent, I won't be able to make payroll. We'll be forced to vacate. Then I suggest you start packing your boxes. Director. Arthur Sterling cut in, a dark, satisfying smirk playing on his lips. Because failure to remit the new balance by the first of the month will result in an immediate, heavily publicized eviction. I'm sure Washington will love hearing how you lost their regional headquarters. Reynolds looked like he was having a stroke. His eyes bulged, and he gripped the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. He looked frantically at Vance, who was currently curled into himself, staring blankly at his computer screen. Completely broken. Wait, please. Reynolds bagel. His massive ego entirely crushed beneath the sheer, suffocating weight of my $93 million war chest. He pressed his hands against the glass, pleading with me. There has to be a compromise. We can't relocate 200 employees in 30 days. Please. Mom, what do you want? Name your terms. Anything. I have exactly 2 terms, I said softly, leaning closer to the plexiglass to ensure the microphone picked up every single chilling syllable. Reynolds nodded frantically, sweat dripping from his heavy jowls. Anything. Name it. Term number 1. I stated, my eyes never leaving his place 40s. Your rent remains tripled. That is entirely non-negotiable. You can figure out how to explain the budget deficit to Washington. Or you can cut your own bloated administrative salaries to make up the difference. But if you want me to authorize a new 10-year lease so you aren't forced to evict 200 federal employees onto the street in 30 days, you will agree to my second term. Yes, Reynolds gasped, completely abandoning any remaining shred of his professional dignity. What is the second term? I finally shifted my gaze away from Reynolds and looked directly at Mr. Vance. He was still slumped in his ergonomic chair, his face buried in his trembling hands. Your director of compliance, I said, pointing a single, manicured finger at the broken man behind the glass. Ask him why I bought this building. Director Reynolds, ask him exactly how he treats citizens who come in here begging for a 30-day extension on a $400 late fee to avoid being thrown out into the freezing winter. Ask him how it feels to laugh at a starving woman while bragging about his $450 weekend brunches. Reynolds slowly turned his head. The realization of what had actually caused this catastrophic corporate apocalypse dawned on him. The color rushed back into his face, not with panic this time, but with absolute, homicidal rage. Vance, Reynolds growled, his voice vibrating with a terrifying intensity. Are you telling me that you provoked a centimillionaire over a $400 power trip? You cost us our federal lease because you wanted to play God in the lobby. I didn't know, Vance wailed, finally looking up. Tears were actually streaming down his cheeks, ruining his cheap hair gel. I didn't know she had $93 million. She looked homeless. That is exactly the point. I snapped, my voice cutting through his pathetic excuses like a serrated blade. You didn't care that you were destroying a life, as long as you thought that life didn't matter. So here is my second term. Reynolds, I am the landlord of this property, which means I dictate the commercial floor plans. I pulled a sleek, silver pen from Arthur Sterling's breast pocket and tapped it against the glass. Mr. Vance is not to be fired, I declared calmly. Firing him is too easy. He would just file for unemployment and sit at home. No, I want him stripped of his director title effective immediately. I want his salary reduced to the absolute federal minimum entry-level tier, and most importantly, he is no longer permitted to work above ground. Vance stopped crying and stared at me, sheer horror paralyzing his features. Sub-level 3, I instructed my lead real estate broker, who was grinning like a shark behind me. The windowless storage basement next to the industrial boiler room and the main HVAC units have the maintenance crew clear a space exactly the size of a standard folding table. That is Mr. Vance's new office for the remainder of his miserable career. If I ever find out he has been promoted, or if I ever see him above the ground floor of my building again, I will void your lease and have you all legally escorted out by armed guards within 24 hours. Reynolds didn't even hesitate for a fraction of a second. He turned to the weeping, shattered bully behind the desk. You heard the landlord? Vance. Reynolds barked, pointing a furious finger toward the back exit. Get a cardboard box. Empty your desk. Give me your master keycard and take your trash down to the boiler room. Right now. The entire lobby watched in deafening silence as Mr. Vance, the man who had terrorized the poor and vulnerable for years, shakily stood up. He grabbed a recycled cardboard box from the printer station and began throwing his cheap corporate awards, his personalized mug, and his expensive metal pen into it. He couldn't look at his colleagues. He couldn't look at the crowd. He had to carry his pathetic little box of belongings out from behind his protective plexiglass and walk the walk of shame right past me. As he shuffled by, head bowed, practically suffocating on his own humiliation, I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The universe had balanced the scales. We turned and walked out of the federal building. Stepping out into the January air, I didn't feel the biting cold anymore. The driver of my Maybach opened the heavy, armored door, and I sank into the heated, massaging leather seats. As we drove away, leaving the tax office in the rearview mirror, Arthur Sterling handed me a thick folder of trust documents. My life changed overnight, but the transition was incredibly peaceful. I didn't buy a fleet of sports cars or throw wild, champagne-soaked yacht parties. That kind of wealth is for people who have something to prove. Instead, I purchased a stunning, secluded estate nestled in 50 acres of old-growth forest just outside the city. It had massive floor-to-ceiling windows, roaring stone fireplaces in almost every room, and a state-of-the-art climate control system. I would never, ever be cold again. I hired a private chef to ensure I would never have to look at a packet of generic ramen for the rest of my existence. But the most important thing I did with my $93, 85 was establish the Eleanor Oakhaven Environmental Foundation, named in honor of my fiercely brave mother. I funneled tens of millions of dollars into the trust, hiring Sterling, Vance and Rothschild on a permanent retainer. Our sole mission was to hunt down megacorporations that illegally dumped toxic waste in impoverished neighborhoods. We provided free, elite legal representation to the exact kind of people who were forced to count pennies in mason jars just to survive. We became a nightmare for the corrupt and a shield for the defenseless. Sometimes, I still think about that bleak Tuesday morning. I think about the sheer, suffocating terror of holding a $400 late fee notice, feeling like the entire world was designed to crush me. Money doesn't buy happiness, but anyone who says that has never been truly poor. Money buys freedom. It buys dignity. It buys the power to look at the bullies of the world and permanently remove their fangs. And as for my ex-boyfriend Derek, who laughed at me and called me a black hole of financial ruin, well, my corporate acquisition team just quietly bought the mid-tier finance firm he works for. But that's a story for another time. If you suddenly found out you had $93 million waiting for you, who is the first person you would fire, demote, or put permanently in their place? Let me know in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button for more crazy stories, and I'll see you in the next one.